She filed 14 complaints. Every single one of them failed. This is a story of a Midwestern farm store, a neighbor who couldn't accept its success, and a community that showed up when it mattered most. Jake Miller's farm store sat on the edge of a quiet Midwestern town, framed by open fields and weathered barns that stood longer than most residents could remember. There was nothing flashy about the place. No neon signage, no loyalty app, no marketing budget. What it had was fresh vegetables harvested that same morning, homemade pies that sold out before noon on Saturdays, and Jake himself, who greeted most customers by name and remembered which neighbor preferred the early sweet corn and which family came specifically for the pepper jam. Over the years, the store had quietly grown into something the town didn't have a word for anymore, a genuine gathering place. Neighbors met there. Stories were exchanged. Local growers filled the shelves. For a lot of people in that community, it was a kind of business they didn't realize they'd been missing until it existed. Not everyone saw it that way. Melissa Grant, president of nearby HOA, had been watching the store's growing popularity with something that started as mild irritation and escalated into a full campaign. Whether it was a steady stream of weekend traffic, the store's expanding footprint, or simply the visibility of someone else's success, something about Jake's operation bothered her deeply. Convinced there had to be a violation hiding somewhere in the paperwork, she filed her first formal complaint with the county, claiming the farm store was generating dangerous traffic congestion in the surrounding area. County officials took it seriously, as they should. Inspectors visited the property, reviewed the records, measured the traffic, and returned a clear finding: no violations. The store was operating entirely within the law, and vehicle activity was well within acceptable limits. A reasonable person accepts that outcome and redirects their energy. Melissa filed another complaint, then another. By the time county employees could recognize her name on an intake form without checking the case number, she had filed 14 separate complaints, many recycling the same core allegations that had already been investigated and dismissed. The county kept responding. Inspectors kept visiting. The findings kept coming back the same way: compliant, legal, no action required. Jake, for his part, refused to let the bureaucratic siege become his identity. While Melissa was building her complaint portfolio, he was expanding his produce selection, adding new vendors, restocking shelves, and showing up every single morning to serve the customers who kept coming back. Business didn't just survive the pressure. It remained steady throughout it. The community noticed his composure, and they respected it. When Melissa's 14 complaint finally triggered a formal zoning review hearing, she arrived at the county building carrying a thick folder of accusations, certain that sheer volume had finally tipped the scales in her favor. Jake arrived with a far thinner stack of documents: permits, past inspections, current licenses, and a clean compliance record going back years. He sat down, folded his hands, and waited. Zoning Chairman Robert Hayes entered the chamber, spotted Jake across the room, and smiled, the natural, unguarded smile of someone who recognizes a familiar face. Melissa's expression shifted immediately. She clearly hadn't known that Hayes was a regular customer at the farm store, and for a brief moment she seemed to believe this personal connection might finally give her the leverage she needed. Hayes addressed it before she could say a word. Personal familiarity would not factor into the proceedings. Every complaint would be evaluated on evidence, and the process would be entirely objective. Then he opened the case file and got to work. County inspectors presented the official record first, years of documentation that told a consistent and unambiguous story. Photographs, permits, inspection reports, licensing records, all showing a business that had never given regulators a legitimate reason for concern. Every required permit was current. Every scheduled inspection had been completed and passed. The paper trail didn't suggest compliance so much as it demonstrated a business owner who had taken his legal obligations seriously from day one. A county transportation official followed with traffic study data collected near the property. The numbers dismantle Melissa's congestion claims methodically. Vehicle activity around the store wasn't approaching the regulatory threshold, let alone exceeding it. The data was current, independently gathered, and not subject to interpretation. Then the public was invited to speak, and the room transformed. An elderly resident explained that the farm store had made fresh, quality food accessible without requiring a long drive to the nearest grocery chain. something that mattered more than most younger attendees realized. A local teacher described bringing her class to the farm to learn where food actually comes from, and how those visits had become some of the most memorable experiences of the school year. Longtime customers talk about the local growers whose products Jake had championed, and what it meant to buy food from someone who knew the farmer by name. One after another, residents stood up and described a business they had come to rely on, not just for what it sold, but for what it represented in a town that had lost too many of its local institutions to strip mall economics. The hearing had arrived with the surface structure of a regulatory proceeding. By the time the testimonies concluded, it had become something else, a community making its values visible on the record. Melissa attempted to resurrect her complaints when her turn came, but the hearing had left her very little room to work with. Each allegation she raised corresponded to an inspection that had already cleared the property, a study that had already disproven the claim, or a document that directly contradicted her position. Chairman Hayes reviewed all 14 complaints individually, not as a batch dismissal, but one by one, with the corresponding evidence examined for each. It took hours. When he finally delivered the finding, it was categorical. Not a single one of the 14 complaints had revealed a zoning violation, a safety concern, or any regulatory issue warranting enforcement action. The farm store was fully compliant and authorized to continue operating without restriction. The relief in the room was immediate and genuine, not triumphant, just a quiet exhale of community that had watched something unfair play out and needed to see it resolved correctly. Melissa sat with her folder in her lap and said nothing. 14 complaints, months of county resources, and the accumulated pressure of a sustained bureaucratic campaign had produced exactly one outcome: a formal, documented confirmation that Jake Miller ran a lawful business. Outside the building, neighbors surrounded Jake with congratulations that had the warmth of something personal rather than political. He accepted them graciously, but what he said afterward stuck with people who were there, that the hearing was never really about winning. It was about demonstrating that facts still hold up under pressure, and that a community willing to show up is one of the most powerful forces in any local dispute. Word spread fast, as it does in small towns. Residents who had followed the story from a distance came to see the store for themselves. Many of them became regulars. The controversy that was designed to diminish the business had, through the transparency of a fair process, turned into the most effective advertisement Jake never paid for. A few weeks after the hearing, Chairman Hayes stopped by the store on his lunch break. No official business, no cameras, just a customer picking up sweet corn. It was an ordinary moment that somehow said everything about how the whole situation had resolved. The shelves were stocked, the aisles were full, and the atmosphere was exactly what it had always been: welcoming, unhurried, and completely unchanged by everything that had tried to end it. Some battles are won in courtrooms. Some are won at zoning hearings. And some are won simply by continuing to show up, doing the work, and trusting that a community paying attention will recognize the difference between facts and noise. Jake Miller understood that from the beginning. It just took 14 complaints for everyone else to see it too.